Before I could set my coffee down on my first day at the Boston office, I spotted my husband's face in a silver frame on my new colleague's desk. "That is my perfect fiancé," she beamed. "We are getting married this fall." I did not scream or admit he had shared my bed for 6 years. I simply smiled back, silently vowing to crush his elaborate double life at the absolute worst possible moment. My name is Ava Ravenswood. At 34 years old, I had just accepted the position of Senior Director of Integration Strategy at Meridian Harbor Systems in Boston. The transition had not been easy. The past several months were a gauntlet of high-stakes interviews, rigorous background checks, and the quiet, persistent anxiety that comes with uprooting your professional life when you are well into your 30s. I stood in the sleek, glass-walled lobby of the executive floor, clutching a cardboard coffee cup like an anchor. I told myself that today, of all days, required absolute composure. I needed to project cold, undeniable competence. No one here could know how hard my heart was hammering against my ribs, or how much I needed this fresh start to prove I was still at the top of my game. Meridian Harbor Systems was a labyrinth of polished concrete, soundproofed glass, and muted gray tones. The human resources representative guided me through the maze of open-plan executive pods, finally stopping at a spacious corner arrangement bathed in morning sunlight. "This is your station, Ava," the representative said softly. "And this is Brooke Delaney. She handles our corporate communications and will be your immediate neighbor." I turned to see a young woman standing up from her ergonomic chair. Brooke was exactly the kind of person who thrived in these high-pressure environments by simply refusing to absorb the stress. She had a soft, unforced smile, perfectly styled honey blonde hair, and an aura of genuine warmth that instantly disarmed my lingering first-day defenses. "It is so wonderful to finally meet you, Ava," Brooke said, extending a hand. "We have been hearing amazing things about your portfolio. If you need anything at all, where to find the good printer paper, how to bypass the terrible coffee machine on floor 4, just let me know." "Thank you, Brooke," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "I am sure I will be taking you up on that offer before noon." I settled into my chair, organizing my laptop, my notebooks, and my pens. I took a deep, silent breath. The hardest part was over. I was in. I began to set up my monitors, my eyes occasionally drifting across the low frosted glass partition that separated my desk from Brooke's. Her workspace was a study in pleasant, curated domesticity amidst the sterile corporate environment. She had a small, thriving potted succulent in a white ceramic dish. Next to it, catching the glare of the Boston morning sun, was a polished silver picture frame. I did not mean to look closely. It was a casual, ambient glance. But my eyes snagged on the image, and the world around me suddenly plunged into a vacuum. The photograph showed Brooke looking radiant, dressed in a sweeping emerald green evening gown. She was leaning affectionately against the shoulder of a tall man in a sharply tailored black tuxedo. His head was turned slightly toward her, a devastatingly familiar, charming half-smile playing on his lips. The air in my lungs turned to ice. My vision narrowed until the only thing existing in the universe was that 2 by 3 inch square of glossy paper. It was Julian Cross, my husband. My brain scrambled to reject the information. It is a look-alike. I told myself, a bizarre, impossible coincidence. Boston is a big city. People have doppelgangers. But the cinematic precision of my memory, the curse of a mind trained to analyze integration strategies, zeroed in on the details. I looked at the man's left wrist, resting casually on his lapel. Peeking out from beneath the starched white cuff of his shirt was a vintage, rose gold chronograph watch with a distinctive navy blue leather strap. I knew that watch. I knew its exact weight. I knew the tiny scratch on the bezel near the 4 o'clock mark. I knew it because I had spent 3 months tracking it down through a private dealer in London to give it to Julian for our 5th wedding anniversary. My hands rested flat on my desk, cold and perfectly still. The noise of the office, the clicking of keyboards, the low hum of distant conversations, the ringing of phones, faded into a dull, rushing static in my ears. I forced myself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, a slow, measured rhythm to keep my hands from shaking. I looked at the photograph again, and a second, far more horrifying realization slammed into me. I recognized the lighting. I recognized the hideous patterned gold wallpaper in the background. It was the backdrop of the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. It was an event Julian and I had attended exactly 2 years ago. I remembered that exact moment. A roving event photographer had asked us to pose. I had been wearing a black silk dress. I had been standing precisely where Brooke was standing in this picture. My arm had been looped through Julian's. The image on Brooke's desk was not just a photo of my husband with another woman, it was a digitally altered forgery. Someone had meticulously cropped me out of my own life, seamlessly inserting Brooke into the empty space I had left behind. The lighting on her face was just a fraction too warm compared to the harsh flash bouncing off Julian's tuxedo. It was a skillful edit, but to me, the flaws were obvious. I did not gasp. I did not throw my coffee cup. I did not stand up and scream that the man in the silver frame had kissed me goodbye at 6 o'clock this morning. Instead, I let a calm, polite mask slide over my face. I leaned slightly toward the partition, gesturing casually with my pen. "That is a lovely frame," I said, my voice betraying absolutely nothing. "Who is that?" Brooke turned away from her monitor, her eyes lighting up with an unmistakable, unfeigned joy. It was the look of a woman who felt completely, deeply secure in her world. "Oh, thank you," Brooke said, reaching out to gently adjust the frame. "That is my fiancé. His name is Ian Mercer." I held my professional smile. It felt like a physical weight on my face, carved from stone. "Ian Mercer. He looks very dashing. Have you two been together long?" "It will be 3 years next month," Brooke replied, her voice softening with affection. "He is wonderful. We are actually finalizing the details right now. We are getting married this fall." "Congratulations," I said evenly. "That is very exciting." "Thank you so much," Brooke smiled. "I am sure you will meet him eventually. He comes to the office parties sometimes." "I look forward to it," I said. I turned back to my blank monitors. The silence in my head was deafening. Nearly 3 years. 3 years of Ian Mercer. This was no fleeting office romance. This was not a careless mistake made on a drunken business trip. This was a parallel universe. My husband was not merely cheating on me. He had constructed an entirely second existence, complete with a fabricated name, a false timeline, and a future that culminated in a wedding this fall. He was living a dual reality, and the walls of those two realities had just collapsed into each other right on my desk on my very first day at work. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. The initial wave of nauseating shock began to recede, leaving behind something much colder, much denser, and infinitely more dangerous. I was a strategist. My entire career was built on dismantling complex structures, identifying hidden liabilities, and orchestrating quiet, flawless takeovers. Julian thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought he had built an impenetrable fortress of lies, but he had made one fatal, arrogant miscalculation. He had let his two worlds intersect. I did not want to confront him tonight. I did not want a tearful, screaming fight in our kitchen. Tears were for victims, and I was not a victim. I was the architect of his impending ruin. I would not blow this up today. I would observe. I would gather every single piece of data. I would map the anatomy of his betrayal down to the last forged pixel. And when the time was right, I would bring his entire fabricated life crashing down around him, burying him in the wreckage of his own design. I kept my eyes locked on Brooke, ensuring my expression remained one of polite, mild interest. The hardest part of a successful interrogation is never letting the target know they are being questioned. I leaned back slightly in my chair, allowing the natural rhythm of office small talk to disguise the fact that I was actively dissecting my own marriage. "He sounds incredibly grounded," I offered, keeping my tone perfectly level. Brooke beamed. entirely oblivious to the absolute wreckage hidden behind my calm facade. She twirled a silver pen between her manicured fingers. He really is. Ian is honestly the most mature man I have ever met. He works in strategic consulting, which can be such a toxic, high-stress environment, but he never brings that energy home. He always tells me he just wants to build a quiet, stable life, nothing flashy. Just us, a nice home, and peace. A quiet, stable life. The words felt like broken glass in my throat. My husband, the man who thrived on corporate warfare, who routinely worked 80-hour weeks and paced our living room at midnight while barking orders into his headset, was selling this woman a fantasy of domestic tranquility. Brooke lifted her left hand to tuck a stray lock of honey-blonde hair behind her ear, deliberately allowing the office lights to catch the jewelry on her ring finger. It was an Art Deco piece. Platinum, featuring a geometric halo of smaller stones surrounding a beautiful, modest center diamond. It was elegant. It was tasteful. It was exactly the kind of ring a man would choose if he were trying to project an image of old-world reliability and unwavering devotion. "That is a stunning ring," I said. "Vintage." "Good eye," Brooke smiled, her cheeks flushing with genuine delight. "He found it at an antique dealer in London. He proposed over a private dinner, just the two of us in his apartment. He actually cooked the entire meal himself. He makes this incredible mushroom risotto. He said he wanted the moment to be completely intimate, just about our commitment, without any of the public spectacle you see these days. We are looking at dates for late October." Late October. I nodded slowly. My mind cataloged the data points with chilling efficiency. My husband did not know how to cook. In the 6 years we had lived together, the man had never successfully boiled a pot of pasta without burning the bottom of the pan. He despised domestic chores, claiming his time was too valuable for the kitchen. Yet, for Brooke, he was standing over a stove, carefully stirring risotto to craft the perfect, intimate proposal. The meticulous nature of his deception was staggering. "It sounds like he values his privacy," I noted casually. "I imagine a guy like that is not posting his dinner on Instagram every night." Brooke laughed, a bright, clear sound that echoed in the quiet space between our desks. "Exactly. I actually tried to look him up online when we first started dating, but he has zero digital footprint. Ian completely hates social media. He says he despises performative living. He told me he prefers to live his life in the real world, rather than curating a fake one for strangers on the internet. He barely even lets me take pictures of him." I felt the blood drain from my face, though I forced my posture to remain relaxed. Performative living. It was an unusual, specific phrase. It was also the exact phrase Julian had used to me on our second date, sitting across a candlelit table, when I playfully teased him about his barren digital presence. He had delivered the line with the exact same charming, self-deprecating smile he was undoubtedly using on the woman sitting next to me. As I looked at Brooke, watching the pure, unfiltered adoration in her eyes, a sharp and unexpected realization settled over me. Brooke was not my enemy. She was not a cunning, malicious homewrecker who had plotted to steal another woman's husband. She was a victim of the exact same charm, the exact same carefully rehearsed lines, and the exact same man. She genuinely believed she was his only priority. She was speaking about her future with a crystalline, untainted faith that made my stomach turn. She was simply a passenger in a vehicle my husband was driving straight toward a cliff. At 10 o'clock, the digital calendar on my screen chimed, signaling my first official executive onboarding meeting. I gathered my tablet and made my way to the boardroom. The space was a massive glass enclosure overlooking the harbor, designed to intimidate and impress. Our division head, an imposing older man named Marcus, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, walking the senior team through the strategic objectives for the upcoming quarter. I took a seat near the middle, with Brooke sitting directly across from me, ready to take the official minutes for the corporate communications file. "Moving on to the back-end integration overhaul," Marcus announced, tapping a thick, sealed folder on the table. "As you all know, this is our largest expenditure of the fiscal year. We need an external vendor to guide the architecture. We have a major pitch scheduled for next week. A boutique firm called Mercer Ridge Advisory. They are the clear frontrunners. Their preliminary brief was aggressive, but highly innovative. I froze. My gaze instantly snapped across the polished wood table to Brooke. At the sound of the name, Mercer Ridge Advisory, her posture shifted dramatically. A sudden, unmistakable spark illuminated her eyes. She quickly ducked her head, pretending to be deeply engrossed in typing on her laptop, but she could not hide the slight, proud smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Her shoulders lifted. She looked like a woman guarding a magnificent, wonderful secret. Mercer Ridge Advisory. Ian Mercer. The invisible bomb I was sitting on began to tick louder. The puzzle pieces were no longer just domestic. They were bleeding into my professional territory. Julian was not merely running a burner phone in a secret apartment. He was operating a corporate entity under his fake identity, and he was positioning that entity to secure a massive contract with the very company that had just hired me. When noon arrived, the tension in my neck was throbbing. I was organizing my inbox when Brooke tapped lightly on the frosted glass dividing our desks. "A few of us from the integration team are grabbing lunch downstairs at the bistro," she said brightly. "You absolutely have to come, Ava. It is a first-day mandatory tradition." I wanted nothing more than to lock myself in a bathroom stall and scream until my lungs gave out. Instead, I grabbed my coat and smiled. I would love to. The bistro was a trendy, overpriced establishment 3 blocks down the street, packed tightly with the downtown corporate crowd. The noise level was deafening, a chaotic symphony of clinking silverware, espresso machines, and overlapping office gossip. I sat wedged in a corner booth, mechanically chewing a piece of grilled chicken while the team chatted about weekend plans and difficult clients. Halfway through the meal, the conversation splintered into smaller groups. Brooke leaned in close to me over her salad, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial, excited whisper. "Hey," she murmured, her eyes shining. "Remember the consulting firm Marcus mentioned in the boardroom? Mercer Ridge." "I do," I replied, keeping my hands steady under the table. "They seem to have a strong reputation." "Ian is the founder," she whispered, unable to contain her pride. "He is the lead on the pitch next week." I let my eyebrows rise in feigned surprise. "Really? That is quite a coincidence. You must be very proud of him." "I am," she beamed, taking a sip of her sparkling water. "He has been working on this architecture for months. He barely sleeps. He told me just last night that closing this contract is going to change our lives. He said it is the final piece of the puzzle. Once this deal is signed, he promised we can buy the house in the suburbs and officially start our life together." The ambient noise of the crowded restaurant seemed to vanish entirely, sucked out of the room by the vacuum of my own sudden horror. A life-changing deal. I set my fork down on the porcelain plate. The metallic clink sounded unnaturally loud in my ears. I looked at Brooke, who was cheerfully mixing her salad, dreaming of a white picket fence funded by a phantom. I walked out of that lunch with a cold, terrifying clarity. This was no longer just an affair. It was not a tragic tale of a wandering eye or a midlife crisis. My husband was dragging my new career into his theater of deception. I had been recruited by Meridian Harbor Systems just weeks before this crucial vendor pitch. Julian had actively encouraged me to take this specific job. He was weaving his two worlds together on purpose. He was using his mistress to stroke his ego, and he was using his wife's pristine professional reputation as collateral in a high-stakes corporate game. He thought he was playing us both. He thought he was the dealer handling the cards. But as we walked back to the office under the bright Boston sun, I made a silent promise to the man who thought he owned the board. I was going to flip the entire table. I walked through the heavy mahogany front door of our brownstone precisely at 7 o'clock that evening. Julian was in the living room, pouring a measure of scotch into a crystal glass. He had loosened his silk tie and unbuttoned his collar, the perfect portrait of a weary, dedicated husband unwinding after a demanding day. "How was day 1, sweetheart?" he asked, walking over to press a warm kiss to my cheek. I leaned into it, allowing his lips to brush my skin, my muscles perfectly relaxed. "It was intense," I replied, my voice steady and light. "A lot of new faces and systems to take in." "You will dominate that place within a month," he smiled, handing me my coat to hang up. "Want me to order dinner?" "We could do that Italian place you love." "I am actually exhausted," I lied smoothly. "I think I just want to review some onboarding documents and get to bed early." "Suit yourself. I will be in the living room if you need me." The moment the solid oak door of my study clicked shut, the pleasant wife vanished. I locked the deadbolt silently. I sat down at my cherry wood desk, opened my personal laptop, and went to work. There would be no tearful confrontation tonight. Screaming and throwing accusations would only give him the opportunity to pivot, to gaslight, to invent a new string of lies. I did not need a confession. I needed raw, irrefutable data. I initiated a systematic digital sweep, targeting the public records, corporate registries, and social footprints. Julian arrogantly assumed I would never possess the technical acumen to trace. I started with the phantom. I ran a comprehensive search for the name Ian Mercer, operating within the strategic consulting sector of the greater metropolitan area. I checked state licensing boards, Chamber of Commerce directories, and professional networking platforms. The result was a complete void. There was no one matching the sophisticated, highly successful profile Brooke had so eagerly described, but my mind flashed back to a mundane moment from the afternoon. Brooke had been complaining about dropping calls and casually rattled off the last 4 digits of her fiancé's mobile number while trying to reach him. I opened a secure browser tab and logged into our joint cellular provider account. I pulled up the comprehensive billing statements for the past 12 months. I hit the search command for those 4 specific digits. The screen populated with hundreds of hits. It was an exact match for the secondary device Julian claimed he kept exclusively for international client emergencies. I stared at the itemized call logs. I saw dozens of minutes logged every single day between his primary phone and that secondary number. I saw text messages sent at 2 o'clock in the morning. I saw massive data spikes during the exact weekends he was allegedly playing golf at a remote club in the Berkshires. He was carrying his fake life in his breast pocket every single day. I closed the cellular tab and opened my personal email archive. I typed Meridian Harbor Systems into the search bar and scrolled back through the past 8 months. The historical pattern emerged with a sickening, calculated clarity. Julian had been the one to originally forward me the executive job posting. I reread his messages, tracing the invisible threads of his manipulation. He had been unusually invested in my interview rounds. When I debated staying at my previous firm, he had systematically dismantled my reservations. He had argued that moving to Meridian would secure our financial future for the next 20 years. He had coached me on the exact buzzwords their executive board loved to hear. He had not been acting as a supportive partner. He had been placing a critical piece on his chessboard. I needed to see the endgame. I connected to the secure Meridian employee intranet, using the high-level credentials I had been issued that morning. Navigating through the complex vendor procurement directory, I pulled up the active file for Mercer Ridge Advisory. The contract currently under consideration was not a minor, easily overlooked consulting gig. It was a request for a multi-million-dollar enterprise integration package. I downloaded the preliminary pitch deck and opened the encrypted file. The biography page for the founder lacked a headshot, displaying only a sleek, minimalist company logo, but the text was an undeniable mirror. The document listed a 10-year track record in aggressive corporate restructuring and specific expertise in post-merger synergies. It detailed a proprietary methodology for lean asset management. It was the exact intellectual framework Julian had developed and refined during his time at his previous firm. The deck even boasted about a highly confidential, successful turnaround of a defunct pharmaceutical company completed 4 years ago. I knew the intimate details of that specific deal because I had stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning proofreading his briefing notes for it. The founder in that deck was my husband. I pulled a heavy yellow legal pad from my top drawer and grabbed a black pen. I drew a harsh line straight down the middle of the page. On the left side, I wrote Julian's narrative, On the right side, I documented the truth. I began to construct a master timeline, juxtaposing the 3-year relationship milestone Brooke had mentioned with my husband's calendar. Suddenly, the vague, blurry edges of my marriage sharpened into agonizing focus. I wrote down the sudden increase in late-night client dinners that always seemed to run past 10 o'clock. I listed the ambiguous, 2-day business trips to Chicago or Atlanta, where his hotel room never seemed to have a functioning landline. I noted the specific evenings his location sharing application went dark, always accompanied by a casual text claiming his battery was dying on the commuter train. My memory, primed by the magnitude of the betrayal, began offering up dozens of micro-clues I had blindly dismissed out of absolute foolish trust. I remembered finding a crumpled dry cleaning receipt for a boutique in a neighborhood we never visited. I recalled random parking tickets from the Seaport district when he was supposed to be in the financial district all day. I thought about the time he abruptly stepped out onto our freezing balcony in the middle of January to take a call, claiming the cellular reception inside the house was terrible, his voice dropping to a hushed, intimate whisper. I remembered the endless weekends spent supposedly golfing with senior partners, returning home without a single trace of a sunburn or the distinct smell of cut grass. The grandfather clock in the downstairs hallway chimed midnight, the deep sound vibrating through the floorboards. I sat back in my leather chair and stared at the legal pad. The ink formed a terrifying map of a meticulously engineered lie. I accepted the cold, hard truth. Julian was not a man panicking to cover up a sloppy, impulsive affair. He was not improvising. He had constructed this alternate reality brick by brick. He had built Mercer Ridge Advisory from the ground up, tailored a flawless fake identity, and nurtured an entire separate relationship for 36 months. But the most horrifying realization of all settled into my bones as I looked back at the multi-million-dollar proposal glowing on my computer screen. I was not just a betrayed spouse. My pristine professional reputation, my newly acquired senior director title, was his ultimate insurance policy. He had maneuvered me into the very company he was targeting, betting that my physical presence on the executive floor would lend unspoken credibility to his shell corporation. He knew Meridian's compliance department would heavily scrutinize any new vendor. But if the wife of their newest strategy leader was unknowingly sitting in the building, projecting an aura of established, wealthy stability, the background checks might just skim the surface. He was planning to use my face, my name, and my career to rob my own employer. He was using my position to get past Meridian's internal scrutiny. He had no idea I had already figured him out. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy front door clicked shut as Julian left for his office. I waited by the living room window, watching his sleek black sedan pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Only then did I walk back to my study, sit at my cherry wood desk, and open my personal laptop. For the entirety of our marriage, I had willingly surrendered the management of our shared finances to Julian. It was not out of laziness or a lack of capability on my part. He was simply a man who lived and breathed numbers, portfolios, and yield margins. He enjoyed the mechanics of wealth management, and I had trusted him implicitly. That blind, unwavering trust was the greatest mistake of my life. I navigated to the secure portal of our primary banking institution. I had the master administrative login, a credential I had not used in over 4 years. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second before I typed in the password. The screen loaded, revealing the dashboard of our checking, savings, and joint investment accounts. I bypassed the summary pages and went straight into the raw, itemized transaction ledgers. I initiated a bulk export, downloading the complete financial history for the past 12 months into a massive spreadsheet. I needed to see the architecture of his spending. I applied a series of custom filters, sorting the data not by date, but by recurring vendor profiles and outbound wire transfers. The screen shifted, reorganizing thousands of rows of data, and there, buried beneath the banal, everyday expenses of our shared life, the financial skeleton of his betrayal emerged. Hidden between the monthly debits for the municipal water bill, our premium health insurance premiums, and the landscaping service were consistent, heavy wire transfers. The recipient was logged under a deliberately vague payee abbreviation B. Delaney. I highlighted the first transaction. It had occurred 11 months ago. I dragged my cursor down the column, tallying the sequence of outflows. The sums were staggering. There were steady monthly payments that clearly aligned with a high-end luxury apartment lease. There were sudden, erratic spikes representing tens of thousands of dollars flowing out for what were undoubtedly custom interior design fees and premium furniture deliveries. There were smaller, yet still exorbitant, charges that I could only attribute to luxury shopping sprees and extravagant weekend getaways. But the most damning line item sat at the very bottom of the filtered list. It was a massive, singular wire transfer executed just 4 weeks prior, flagged with a banking code that indicated an earnest money deposit for a real estate acquisition. I ran the automated summation tool on the column. The total amount siphoned from our joint liquid assets over the last 11 months exceeded $180,000. My chest tightened, a cold and heavy pressure settling over my lungs. $180,000. He had not just bought his mistress a few nice dinners or a piece of jewelry. He had systematically drained our shared wealth to finance the infrastructure of a completely fabricated future. Yet, as I stared at the devastating number on the screen, the analytical side of my brain flagged a glaring discrepancy. The math did not make sense. While Julian earned a substantial income, pulling $180,000 in liquid cash from our joint accounts without triggering a margin call or alerting my own peripheral awareness of our standard balances was impossible. Our primary checking account never held that much idle capital. He had to be pulling the funds from a secondary, massive credit source. I closed the spreadsheet and returned to the main banking dashboard. I clicked away from the joint accounts and navigated to the isolated section that housed my premarital assets. Before I ever met Julian, I had purchased a beautiful historic townhouse in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. It was the crowning achievement of my early career. A property I had paid down aggressively and maintained strictly under my own name. It was my ultimate safety net, an asset utterly legally separate from our marital estate. I clicked on the Property Portfolio tab. The page refreshed. My breath caught in my throat. Directly beneath the property profile, glaring in bright red digital ink, was an active home equity line of credit. The account history indicated it had been opened exactly 3 months ago. The available balance was nearly depleted, maxed out to cover the exact sum of the funds wired to Brooke Delaney. The room seemed to tilt. Julian had not merely redirected his discretionary income. He had leveraged my personal, premarital home. I clicked into the digital document repository associated with the loan. I needed to see the authorization paperwork. I downloaded the primary collateral agreement and scrolled rapidly through the dense legal jargon until I reached the final page. There, on the bottom right corner, was the electronic scan of the owner's confirmation signature. I leaned in, my face inches from the glowing monitor. It was my name. The handwriting was incredibly close to my own. It possessed the same sharp, aggressive slant I used when signing corporate documents. It had the same sweeping loop on the capital letter of my first name. To a junior loan officer processing a stack of electronic files, it would look perfectly legitimate. But I knew my own hand. I stared at the way the final letter of my last name connected to the baseline. The stroke was hesitant, slightly jagged, lacking the fluid, careless muscle memory of a signature I had written thousands of times. Furthermore, the pen pressure on the downstrokes was too heavy. It was the signature of a man who had spent hours practicing it on a legal pad, getting the geometry right, but failing to capture the natural velocity. Julian had committed felony wire fraud. He had forged my signature to mortgage my separate property, stealing the equity I had built over a decade, and he had used that stolen money to buy a ring and a home for another woman. The profound emotional devastation of his infidelity evaporated instantly, entirely incinerated by the cold, blinding reality of financial assault. He had crossed the line from a cheating husband to a white-collar criminal. I reached for my mobile phone resting on the edge of the desk. I did not hesitate. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed the call button for Simone Hart. Simone was not just my oldest friend. She was a ruthless, highly sought-after property and marital dispute attorney who possessed a reputation for dismantling hostile corporate divorces with surgical precision. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Ava, it is a Tuesday morning. You are supposed to be dominating your new integration team. Tell me you are not calling to say you hate the new job." I stared at the forged signature on my screen. My voice came out flat, entirely stripped of any warmth or vulnerability. "I do not need to be comforted," I said, the words sharp and precise. "I need to secure my assets and evidence." The line went dead silent for exactly 3 seconds. When Simone spoke again, the playful banter was gone. She had instantly switched into the apex predator of the legal world. "Tell me exactly what you are looking at," she commanded. "Julian has been running a parallel life," I stated, my eyes scanning the spreadsheet data. "He has diverted over $180,000 to a woman named Brooke Delaney over the last 11 months. But that is not the worst part. I am currently looking at a home equity line of credit secured against my Beacon Hill townhouse. It was opened 3 months ago. He forged my signature on the owner's confirmation documents to access the equity." I heard the sharp intake of breath on her end, followed immediately by the rapid clicking of a keyboard. "Are you absolutely certain it is a forgery?" Simone asked, her tone entirely clinical. "I am staring at the PDF right now. He missed the connection on the final letter. It is his pen pressure. He committed fraud to fund his mistress. Listen to me very carefully." "Ava," Simone said, her voice dropping into a low, authoritative register, "do not confront him. Do not change the passwords on the joint accounts yet. If he realizes you know, he will start destroying the digital paper trail and moving whatever capital is left offshore." "I have not said a word to him," I confirmed. "Good. Here is what you are going to do," she instructed rapidly. "You are going to back up every single document you just viewed. Download the statements, the loan applications, the wire transfer receipts, and the IP logs. If you can access them, you will move those files onto an encrypted external drive, not a cloud server he might have mirrored access to. Then, you are going to print hard copies of the most damning pieces of evidence, specifically the forged signature page and the wire transfers to this Brooke woman. Put the physical copies in a secure location outside of your house. I will put them in my private safety deposit box at the downtown branch during my lunch hour," I replied, already initiating the secondary download protocols. "Perfect," Simone agreed. "Secondly, you are going to open a completely new, isolated checking account at a bank we have never used. Route your new Meridian Harbor System salary directly into that account starting today. He does not get to touch another dime of your corporate income. Done. And finally," Simone warned, her voice deadly serious, "from this exact second forward, you do not sign a single piece of paper Julian puts in front of you. I do not care if he says it is a routine tax extension or a delivery receipt for a package. You read every single line, and if he pressures you, you tell him you need your legal counsel to review it. He is desperate, and he is actively stealing from you. We treat him as a hostile entity. He is a threat," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And there is a corporate angle to this. He is trying to win a vendor contract with my company under a false identity. I think he plans to use the money he stole from my property to fund the pitch." Simone exhaled sharply. "Then get me every document you have. Bring the hard copies to my office tomorrow evening. We lock down your assets first, and then we move." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the desk. The printer in the corner of my study hummed to life, methodically spitting out page after page of my husband's financial crimes. I sat in the quiet room, listening to the rhythmic sound of the machine printing the exact evidence I would use to destroy him. As the week progressed, the atmosphere within the executive suite of Meridian Harbor Systems grew increasingly suffocating. To the rest of the floor, Brooke and I were quickly becoming a seamless, highly functional team. She gravitated toward me precisely because I projected an aura of absolute, unshakable maturity. I was the seasoned senior director who listened attentively but never pried, offering measured advice without crossing the boundary into invasive personal questioning. My strategic distance made her feel incredibly safe. She had no idea that my silence was not born of professional courtesy, but of a calculated, terrifying need to survive the psychological warfare raging inside my own head. It happened on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The office was mostly empty, the majority of the senior staff having decamped to the main conference hall for a quarterly earnings review. I was sitting at my desk, drafting an integration protocol, when Brooke softly tapped on the frosted glass divider. She walked over, holding a sleek silver tablet against her chest, her expression a mixture of professional anxiety and giddy excitement. "Ava, I know you are swamped with the new protocols, but could I possibly ask you for a massive favor?" she asked, her voice dropping to a hushed, conspiratorial volume. I turned my chair away from my monitors, offering her a calm, inviting smile. "Of course. Brooke, what do you need?" She placed the tablet gently on my desk. "Ian just sent over the finalized presentation deck for the Mercer Ridge advisory pitch next week. I am supposed to be proofing the corporate communications and media strategy slides. But honestly, looking at the structural flow, I feel completely out of my depth. You have seen hundreds of these executive pitches. Would you mind giving it a quick sanity check? Just to see if the narrative hits the right notes for our executive board." My heart slammed against my ribs, a violent, heavy thud that I was certain she could hear. The very blueprint of my husband's fraud was being hand-delivered to me by his mistress. "I would be happy to take a look," I replied, my voice miraculously devoid of the tremor vibrating through my hands. Brooke unlocked the tablet and opened the presentation file, sliding the device toward me. "Thank you so much. I just want it to be absolutely perfect for him." She returned to her desk, leaving me alone with the glowing screen. I did not immediately look at the slides. I took a slow, deep breath, bracing myself for the impact. Then, I swiped to the first page. It was a masterclass in corporate branding. Navy blue and brushed silver aesthetics, bold typography, and aggressive, confident phrasing. I swiped past the executive summary and landed on the legal and structural overview slide. There it was, printed in stark white letters against the dark background. The legal entity was registered under a single managing partner, Julian Cross. Beneath it, in a slightly smaller font, was the notation for the firm's client-facing pseudonym. Ian Mercer was listed simply as a doing business as brand identity, a fictional construct designed for public relations and networking. "I know the name thing is a little confusing," Brooke suddenly called out from her side of the partition, noticing the slide I was parked on. "Ian is actually his middle name, and Mercer is a family name on his mother's side. He uses Julian Cross for all the boring tax documents and legal filings, but he prefers Ian Mercer for everything else. He says his legal name carries too much baggage from his old Wall Street days, and he wanted a clean slate for this new venture." I stared at the tablet. A clean slate. It was a perfectly plausible, easily digestible lie designed to satisfy a woman who was too deeply in love to demand to see a driver's license. "It is a very common practice in boutique consulting," I replied smoothly, not taking my eyes off the screen. "It helps compartmentalize liability." "Exactly," Brooke chimed in, leaning over the glass divider, her eyes shining with pride. "And he is so brilliant with the structuring. He actually told me last night that once the first formal funding round closes after this pitch, he is transferring 15% of the equity interest directly into my name." My fingers froze over the glass screen. 15%. "That is a very generous stake," I managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Brooke smiled softly, gazing out the window toward the harbor. "He said it is because I believed in him right from the beginning, back when he had absolutely nothing. He says I am his foundation. He had nothing because he had been systematically funneling his wealth out of our joint accounts and hiding it behind a labyrinth of shell companies. He was using the money he had stolen from me to buy her loyalty, and he was using her loyalty to validate his counterfeit reality." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and continued scrolling through the deck. I bypassed the marketing strategies and stopped dead at slide 18, the project budget and capital allocation. My eyes scanned the meticulously formatted financial tables. Halfway down the page, listed under initial vendor requirements, was a line item labeled as an upfront mobilization fee. It was categorized as essential capital required to onboard the necessary software licenses and dedicated personnel before the project's official launch date. I looked at the number in the corresponding column, $180,000. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. It was the exact same figure. Down to the final dollar, it was the precise amount Julian had drained from the fraudulent home equity line of credit he had opened against my Beacon Hill townhouse. The terrifying, brilliant architecture of his entire scheme instantly crystallized in my mind. Julian was not just financing a double life, he was executing a complex money laundering operation. If Meridian Harbor Systems approved this pitch and paid that mobilization fee, Julian would take that clean, corporate cash, and immediately use it to pay off the fraudulent mortgage on my house before I ever noticed the debt existed. He would wash the stolen money through my own employer, effectively erasing the financial crime, while simultaneously launching his new firm using completely legitimate revenue. I needed to confirm the digital trail. I tapped the screen, pulling up the document's internal properties and metadata hidden behind the presentation software's interface. I navigated to the authorship history. The file had been created and modified extensively over the past 72 hours. The last saved author was listed simply as J. Cross. But the metadata also logged the unique serial prefix of the device used to compile the final export. I memorized the alphanumeric sequence. It was the exact prefix of the silver MacBook Pro that sat on the mahogany desk in our home study. The laptop he strictly forbade me from using because it contained highly sensitive client data. The walls of the Meridian office felt like they were closing in, the sleek glass and concrete suddenly resembling the bars of a meticulously designed cage. My marriage and my career were no longer two separate entities. They had been violently stitched together into a singular, weaponized trap. I closed the metadata window and prepared to hand the tablet back. But my thumb slipped, accidentally swiping to the very end of the document, past the formal presentation, into the hidden appendix reserved for internal vendor notes. It was a stakeholder map, a strategic breakdown of the Meridian Harbor Systems Executive Board, detailing who held the power to approve or kill the contract. Next to the division head, Marcus, was a yellow warning icon indicating he would be tough on the financial projections. But it was the entry directly beneath Marcus that made my blood run entirely cold. There was a green approval icon next to a beautifully formatted text box. Inside the box, it read, Ava Ravenswood, Senior Director of Integration Strategy. Underneath my name, Julian had typed a brief, clinical assessment, key client executive, highly receptive to our integration methodology, possesses a positive influence on the internal approval process. Leverage this relationship to bypass secondary compliance checks. A violent shudder ripped through my spine. He was not just hoping I would stay out of his way. He was actively banking on my presence. He had orchestrated my recruitment to this specific company so he could point to me on a spreadsheet and use my hard-earned professional credibility to legitimize his fraudulent pitch. He was using my reputation as a human shield against the corporate compliance team. If the deal went south, if the funds were ever audited and the fraud exposed, I would be the senior director who approved the vendor. I would be the one holding the bag. I would look like an active co-conspirator who had helped her husband embezzle millions from her own employer. I sat in the heavy silence of the office, staring at my own name on the screen. The agonizing, emotional pain of the betrayed wife was entirely gone, replaced by the icy, calculated rage of a woman who had just realized she was standing on a landmine. Julian had not just broken my heart. He had designed a system to destroy my livelihood, steal my assets, and frame me for his own financial salvation. I carefully locked the tablet screen, stood up, and walked over to Brooke's desk. I handed the device back to her. my face a perfect mask of corporate neutrality. "The narrative flow is excellent, Brooke," I said, my voice steady and entirely devoid of mercy. "The strategy is incredibly solid. I think Ian is going to get exactly what he deserves." Simone's office was aggressively modern, all sharp angles and frosted glass. Sitting high above the financial district, I arrived exactly at 7 o'clock on Friday evening. Simone did not offer me a drink, nor did she offer any sympathetic platitudes. She simply gestured to the man sitting at the far end of her massive slate conference table. "Ava, this is Cole Maddox," Simone said, taking a seat beside him and opening her leather folio. "He is a forensic accountant. He usually untangles high-net-worth divorces, but his true specialty is corporate fraud tracing. He operates strictly off the grid until we are ready to file." Cole was an unassuming man, dressed in a muted gray suit, but his eyes were sharp, analytical, and completely unblinking. He slid a thick, heavily bound folder across the polished stone surface toward me. "Ms. Ravenswood," Cole began, his voice dry and entirely devoid of any dramatic inflection. "Your attorney provided me with the initial banking data and the property line of credit documents you downloaded earlier this week. I spent the last 48 hours running a deep subsurface trace on the capital flow you identified." I opened the folder. The first page contained a complex, color-coded flowchart mapping out a web of financial routing. "Your husband is not simply transferring cash," Cole explained, tapping the first node on the chart with a silver pen. "He is actively washing it. Moving funds directly from a home equity line secured by your personal property into his new consulting firm would be entirely too obvious. Any basic corporate audit would flag it as a massive liability. Instead, the capital was deliberately routed through two separate shell-limited liability companies." I traced the harsh black lines with my index finger. "He is layering the money." "Exactly," Cole nodded, looking pleased that he did not have to explain the basic mechanics of money laundering. "The first entity is registered in Delaware. The second is based in Wyoming. Both are states with incredibly strict corporate secrecy laws. By the time the money finally hits the operating accounts of Mercer Ridge Advisory, its origin is completely obfuscated. On paper, it no longer looks like a personal loan taken against a marital asset. It looks exactly like legitimate, early-stage angel investment capital injected by private, anonymous backers. He cleaned the money to make his startup look financially viable to outside observers and potential clients." I stared at the intricate web of deception. Julian had applied his formidable professional genius to the architecture of our personal destruction. "There is more," Cole said, instructing me to turn to the next page. I pulled the incorporation filings and the commercial real estate leases for Mercer Ridge. "Your husband is selling this firm to the public and to your employer as a high-end elite advisory group. However, the official registered business address is not a commercial office building in the financial sector. It is a shared co-working space located above a dry cleaner in a secondary suburb. It is a virtual mailbox that costs roughly $200 a month. The entire corporate facade is built completely on air." Simone leaned forward, crossing her arms tightly over the table. "He is trying to land a massive vendor contract with Meridian Harbor Systems, using a hollowed-out shell company funded by stolen equity. Ava, we are no longer just looking at grounds for a highly favorable divorce settlement. We are looking at federal wire fraud and systemic corporate espionage." I closed the folder, the leather binding feeling cold against my palms. As the forensic reality of his crimes settled into the room, a new, sickening puzzle piece began to force its way into my conscious mind. Something about my placement at Meridian Harbor Systems was still violently bothering me. When I returned to my empty house that night, I bypassed the living room entirely and went straight up the stairs to my study. I locked the door, opened my personal laptop, and logged into my private email server. I needed to revisit the very beginning of my timeline. I needed to understand exactly how I had ended up in the crosshairs of his corporate target. I utilized the search function to locate the initial email thread with the executive headhunter who had first approached me for the senior director position 6 months ago. I scrolled to the very bottom of the chain, isolating the first point of contact. The recruiter had written a standard, flattering introduction, ending with a very specific sentence. Your profile was highly recommended to me by a trusted industry contact who indicated you might be an outstanding candidate seeking a more stable environment. At the time, I had assumed the recommendation came from a former colleague, a previous client, or a networking acquaintance. I had been flattered by the industry recognition. I had not questioned the mechanics of the outreach. Now, staring at the screen with eyes wiped entirely clean of all naive trust, I saw the invisible strings attached to my own career. I opened a new draft and typed a quick, polite message to the recruiter. I framed it as a casual follow-up regarding a potential candidate referral of my own, keeping the tone light and professional. I carefully slipped a seemingly innocent question into the final paragraph. By the way, I realized I never formally thanked the person who initially put my name on your desk for the Meridian role. Would you mind reminding me who that contact was? I hit send and waited in the silent, dark room. The reply arrived in my inbox exactly 20 minutes later. No problem at all. Ava, it was Julian Cross. He spoke incredibly highly of your strategic capabilities and mentioned you were quietly looking for a transition. We always appreciate his insights. The glow of the monitor cast long, harsh shadows across my cherry wood desk. I read the sentence again, and then a third time, letting the absolute horror of his calculations sink into my bones. My husband had not merely supported my career move. He had secretly orchestrated it. He had discreetly fed my resume to the headhunter, carefully positioning me as an executive looking for stability, knowing my pristine qualifications would easily land me the job. He wanted his wife embedded deeply within Meridian Harbor systems at the exact moment Mercer Ridge Advisory launched its aggressive bid for the integration contract. He needed a credible insider inside Meridian, so his company would look legitimate, and if the deal ever collapsed, he was ready to let my name take the blame. If his magnificent house of cards ever collapsed, I would be the one buried under the rubble, facing corporate disgrace and potential criminal charges, while he walked away clean, claiming ignorance. The transformation inside me was instantaneous and absolute. The agonizing, suffocating pain of the betrayed wife, the woman who had silently grieved the loss of her marriage, and the agonizing reality of another woman wearing her husband's ring vanished. It evaporated entirely into the cold, sterile air of my study. I stopped viewing Julian as a husband who had strayed. He was no longer a man I loved who had made a terrible mistake. He was a hostile corporate entity. He was an active, existential threat to my freedom, my finances, and my future. I was no longer a victim trapped in a pathetic domestic tragedy. I was a senior integration strategist who had just intercepted the enemy's master playbook. I closed the laptop, the sudden darkness feeling strangely comforting. The tears were completely gone. The anger was no longer a hot, chaotic flame burning in my chest. It had condensed into a dense, unbreakable core of pure, calculated logic. I was officially done thinking about how to confront a cheating spouse. I was done thinking about dramatic scenes, broken plates, or tearful confessions in the kitchen. From this second forward, my sole objective was the systematic, ruthless dismantling of a complex fraud structure. My marriage was dead, and its corpse was nothing more than a minor variable in a much larger, much more dangerous war, and I was finally ready to play my hand. Brooke's desk was no longer just a workstation. It had become a confessional. Over the past 2 weeks, my carefully constructed persona of the seasoned, unbothered senior director had worked almost too well. Brooke gravitated toward me constantly. She saw me as an older, wiser confidant, someone who had navigated the complex waters of corporate life and adult relationships without losing her edge. I listened without judgment, offering calm, pragmatic advice whenever she encountered a minor roadblock in her communications strategy. Because I never pried into her personal life, she felt entirely safe volunteering the most intimate details of it. Late one Tuesday afternoon, while we were waiting for a massive vendor compliance file to compile on the shared server, Brooke spun her ergonomic chair around to face me. Her usual bright demeanor was clouded by a rare shadow of hesitation. She asked if we could grab a coffee in the break room. Once the heavy acoustic door hissed shut behind us, cutting off the hum of the executive floor, she leaned against the stainless steel counter and let out a long, heavy sigh. "Ava, can I ask you something personal?" she began, staring down at her paper cup. "You just always seem so put together. I need an objective opinion." "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice soft and steady. "Whatever stays in this room, stays in this room." She admitted that the absolute secrecy surrounding Ian was starting to wear on her spirit. "He is wonderful. He truly is," she clarified quickly, a desperate loyalty lacing her tone. "But he is always so guarded. He told me he is currently closing out a messy old relationship. He said it is a massive legal headache, completely toxic, and he just needs to keep his head down until the lawyers finalize the dissolution. He promised me that once this Meridian contract is signed and Mercer Ridge is officially capitalized, all the shadows will disappear. He said we will finally start our real life. A messy old relationship, a legal headache." I stood perfectly still, sipping my black coffee, as the sheer audacity of my husband's script washed over me. Julian had not merely omitted my existence, he had weaponized it. He had painted our 6-year marriage, our shared home, and our deeply intertwined lives as a toxic, bureaucratic hurdle he was desperately trying to escape. And crucially, he had never once used the word wife. As I looked at Brooke, noting the genuine vulnerability in her eyes and the anxious way she twisted the vintage platinum engagement ring on her finger, the last remnants of my hostility toward her completely dissolved. I realized with absolute certainty that Brooke was not a predator. She was not a calculating woman who knowingly crept into another woman's home to dismantle her family. She was merely a captive audience member who had been handed a beautifully bound, entirely fabricated script. She genuinely believed she was starring in a romantic drama, entirely unaware she was actually trapped in a tragedy of his making. The following day, Brooke insisted on taking me out for lunch to thank me for being such a supportive listener. We walked to a quiet, upscale bistro near the harbor, away from the usual corporate crowd. Halfway through our meal, her anxiety from the previous afternoon had completely vanished, replaced once again by the intoxicating high of her promised future. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a glossy, oversized envelope. "I have to show you this," she whispered, her eyes dancing with unfiltered excitement. "Ian surprised me with it last night." She slid a series of high-resolution architectural renderings across the white linen tablecloth. They were mock-ups of a breathtaking luxury penthouse overlooking the Charles River. The images displayed floor-to-ceiling glass windows, custom-imported marble countertops, and a sprawling private terrace that seemed to float above the Boston skyline. "He already put down the initial deposit," Brooke beamed, tracing the outline of the terrace with her fingernail. "He wants both of our names on the purchase contract. He said it is our foundation. A real partnership." A cold, sharp shiver ripped down my spine, settling heavily in the pit of my stomach. A completely equal partnership. My mind instantly flashed back to the banking spreadsheet locked safely on my encrypted drive. The timeline aligned flawlessly. The massive earnest money deposit Julian had wired out of our accounts 4 weeks ago was not just sitting in a vacuum. It was the exact down payment for the penthouse currently staring up at me from the bistro table. Julian was buying his new life with Brooke using the very equity he had stolen by forging my signature on my Beacon Hill townhouse. He was literally building their dream home on the stolen, fraudulent foundation of my own premarital asset, and he had convinced this poor, naive woman that it was a grand, romantic gesture of his unwavering commitment. "It is absolutely stunning, Brooke," I managed to say, my voice a marvel of engineered composure. "It looks like a dream." "It really is," she sighed happily, gathering the renderings back into the envelope. "Which is why next Friday is so important. Meridian is hosting the official partnership signing gala at the Harbor Light Grand. Ian is going to formally debut Mercer Ridge to your executive board and the private equity investors." She reached out and briefly squeezed my hand. He told me he wants me there by his side. No more hiding, no more secrecy. He is going to introduce me to everyone as his fiancé. I am already looking at dresses. I want to look perfect for him when he finally steps into the spotlight. The Harbor Light Grand. Next Friday. The pieces of the chessboard violently snapped into their final, devastating positions. Julian was not just planning to close a multi-million-dollar corporate deal. He was orchestrating a massive public coronation for his new identity. He intended to stand in the ballroom of one of the most prestigious hotels in Boston, shake hands with the senior executives of my company, secure funding backed by his own financial crimes, and parade his new bride-to-be in front of the city's corporate elite. He genuinely believed he had successfully segregated his two universes. He believed his wife would be safely at home, perhaps reviewing a minor integration document in her study, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband and her colleague were celebrating her financial ruin in a grand ballroom across town. I looked at Brooke's beaming face, her cheeks flushed with the anticipation of a happily ever after that was financed entirely by federal wire fraud. A part of me, a deeply buried, compassionate part, wanted to grab her by the shoulders right then and there. I wanted to shake her, to scream the truth, to pull her out of the burning building before the roof collapsed and crushed her. But the strategist in me, the cold, calculating architect who had spent the last week securing forensic accountants and emergency freeze orders, overruled the impulse instantly. If I warned her now, she would panic. Her immediate instinct would be to confront him. Julian would instantly realize his cover was blown, and he would use the remaining days to liquidate his offshore accounts, destroy the digital servers, and vanish into the wind before my legal team could strike. I could not afford to give him a single second of a head start. Brooke needed to see the monster without his mask. She needed to witness the absolute destruction of his facade at the exact moment he felt the most invincible. I smiled back at her, a genuine, terrifyingly calm smile. As we finished our lunch, I would let her buy the dress. I would let him step into the blinding spotlight he craved so desperately. I would wait until the two worlds he had so carefully kept apart finally collided in the exact same room, and I would be the one standing there to lock the doors. I did not march into the Human Resources Department in a fit of hysterical tears. I did not draft an emotional, frantic email to the executive board demanding justice. Vengeance, when executed correctly, is not a dramatic performance. It is a sterile, highly disciplined bureaucratic process. It is about filing the right paperwork with the right authority at the exact right moment to trigger a catastrophic systemic failure. I was not a scorned woman seeking sympathy. I was a senior strategist, systematically neutralizing a hostile corporate threat. On Wednesday morning, I bypassed my usual route to my desk and took the elevator directly to the top floor of the Meridian Harbor Systems building. I had sent a securely encrypted message the night before to Claire Donovan, the head of our internal compliance division, requesting a closed-door meeting regarding a Tier 1 vendor anomaly. Claire was a formidable woman who viewed corporate risk with the cold, unblinking detachment of a surgeon. She did not tolerate office gossip, and she certainly did not handle marital disputes. When the heavy wooden door of her office clicked shut and the electronic privacy lock engaged, I took a seat across from her massive glass desk. I did not start with my personal life. I started with the business. Claire, I am formally submitting a conflict of interest declaration regarding the Mercer Ridge advisory pitch scheduled for Friday, I stated, my voice entirely devoid of inflection. I slid a neatly bound black folder across the polished glass. I have concrete reason to believe the vendor is operating under a fraudulent corporate structure. Furthermore, they are attempting to utilize illicitly obtained capital to meet our vendor liquidity requirements, and they have actively weaponized my employment here to bypass your compliance checks. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. She did not ask questions immediately. She opened the folder and began to read. I walked her methodically through the documentary evidence. I showed her the discrepancy between the public brand identity and the legal founder documents. I showed her the suspicious seed funding origins. Finally, I directed her attention to the internal strategy appendix I had discovered on Brooke's tablet, highlighting the exact paragraph where my own name was listed as a strategic asset meant to manipulate the executive approval process. I watched the realization wash over Claire's face. The strictly professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing profound shock, before instantly hardening into corporate defense mode. "Julian Cross is your legal spouse," Claire said, looking up from the documents, her voice dangerously quiet. "He orchestrated your recruitment to Meridian to serve as a blind guarantor for his shell company. If we had funded that initial mobilization fee next week, Meridian Harbor Systems would be legally implicated in laundering stolen personal assets." "Exactly," I replied, maintaining absolute eye contact. "He is using the company as a washing machine, and he is using my professional reputation as the shield. I am bringing this to you now because the company needs to protect its capital, and I need to protect my career." Claire closed the folder, resting her hands flat on the cover. "This is a severe, actionable breach of legal protocol. We cannot simply cancel the pitch without tipping him off, which could lead to him destroying the financial records before law enforcement can secure them. We need to catch him in the act of presenting the fraudulent documents to our investors." She agreed to launch a shadow investigation immediately. She would coordinate quietly with the Meridian Legal Counsel. Her strict instruction to me was to maintain a completely flawless facade. I had to walk back down to my floor, sit next to his mistress, and act as though the world was perfectly normal until the trap snapped shut. Later that evening, I sat in the secure conference room of my lawyer's office. Simone Hart stood by the window, while Cole Maddox, the forensic accountant, spread a massive, printed schematic across the slate table. Cole had finished translating the raw banking data into a visual masterpiece of financial ruin. He had drawn a thick red line connecting the unauthorized credit limit on my Beacon Hill townhouse directly to a newly formed limited liability company in Delaware. From there, the line branched to a secondary holding company in Wyoming, effectively stripping the money of its original identity. Finally, the clean, untraceable funds were funneled directly into the primary operating accounts of Mercer Ridge Advisory, where they were subsequently bled out to cover the exorbitant rent on Brooke's luxury apartment and the massive deposit for their future penthouse. "It is a closed loop of absolute fraud," Cole murmured, tapping his pen against the paper. "He built an entire fake enterprise using the walls of your house as collateral." Simone walked over to the table, her expression fierce and predatory. "I have the emergency ex parte asset freeze injunctions fully drafted. The paperwork is sitting on the desk of a sympathetic judge I have known for 15 years. We have the proof of the forged signature on the mortgage documents, and we have the corporate embezzlement trail. All we need is the trigger." "The trigger is Friday night," I told her, my eyes fixed on the flowchart. "He is hosting a partnership signing gala at the Harbor Light Grand. He is bringing his investors, his mistress, and my executive board into the same room." "Then that is when we strike," Simone confirmed. "The exact moment he steps up to that podium, my process servers will file the injunctions. We will freeze his domestic accounts, his corporate holding accounts, and his shadow entities simultaneously. He will not even be able to pay the valet to get his car back." I spent the next 2 hours printing and assembling the evidence. I created 3 identical, massive binders. The repetitive mechanical sound of the heavy-duty hole punch felt incredibly satisfying, like the sound of a weapon being loaded. I handed one binder to Simone for the court filings. I prepared a second binder for Claire's internal legal team at Meridian. The third binder went into a heavy canvas bag. First thing in the morning, I would lock it inside a subterranean steel safety deposit box at a private bank downtown, registered exclusively under my maiden name. Redundancy is the ultimate armor in a corporate war. When I arrived home on Thursday evening, the atmosphere in the house was unusually charged. The quiet, predictable rhythm of our evenings was entirely absent. Julian was pacing in the kitchen, dressed in a sharp casual suit, looking highly energetic but carrying an underlying frantic tension. "Hey, sweetheart," he said quickly, walking over to kiss my forehead. He immediately stepped back and grabbed a thick stack of legal-sized papers resting on the marble island. "I know you are tired from work, but I need a huge favor," he continued, his tone artificially light and breezy. "My broker sent over the routine property insurance updates for the townhouse and this house. He is hounding me for them. I need you to just sign on the yellow sticky flag so I can send them out via overnight courier in the morning. It will take 2 seconds." He pushed the stack toward me, uncapping a premium black fountain pen and holding it out. I looked at his face. His smile was perfectly practiced, but his eyes were sharp, tracking my every micro-expression. He was rushing. He was trying to force a blind signature through sheer momentum, banking on the exhaustion of my workday to lower my defenses. "I have a massive migraine," I said, rubbing my temples slowly and adopting a look of profound weariness. "My eyes have been burning from looking at integration spreadsheets all day. I cannot process tiny legal jargon right now. Julian, just leave them on my desk in the study. I will review them and sign them while I have my coffee in the morning." His jaw tightened. A microscopic flash of genuine panic crossed his features before he quickly buried it. He opened his mouth to press the issue, to insist it was just standard boilerplate text, but he caught himself. He knew that pushing too hard over a mundane insurance document would break his supportive husband character and invite unwanted scrutiny right before his pivotal week. "All right," he conceded smoothly, though his voice was noticeably strained. "Just please make sure you do it before you leave for the office. It is really important we keep the coverage updated." "I promise," I lied. I picked up the heavy stack of papers and walked slowly up the stairs to my study. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me and turned on the brass desk lamp. I did not bother looking at the pages flagged with yellow sticky notes. I sat down and began reading the document line by line, page by page, searching for the poison pill he was trying to force down my throat. I found it buried deep within the fine print on page 22. Disguised under a section labeled as Asset Liability Acknowledgement, it was a reaffirmation clause. It was a legally binding retroactive authorization of the existing home equity line of credit attached to my Beacon Hill property. If I signed my name on the final page of this packet, I would legally validate his previous forgery. I would be formally acknowledging the massive debt as a sanctioned, joint marital decision. His theft would instantly transform into a legitimate, unchallengeable financial obligation. I sat back in my leather chair, dropping the papers onto the desk. He knew. Or, at the very least, the subconscious risk assessment algorithm in his brilliant, calculating mind had triggered a massive alarm. He could feel the unstable foundation of his double life beginning to tremble. He was desperately trying to close his liability loop, attempting to secure the stolen equity before he stepped into the blinding spotlight of the Harbor Light Grand. He thought he was outsmarting a tired, oblivious wife. He had absolutely no idea that the wife he was trying to manipulate was sitting in the dark, holding the detonator to his entire existence. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression in the quiet room. The storm was no longer just approaching on the horizon, it was already inside the house. In the final 72 hours leading up to the Friday gala, the atmosphere inside our home shifted into a bizarre, suffocating domestic performance. Julian, undoubtedly sensing an invisible, microscopic fracture in his perfectly curated universe, began to overcompensate with an intensity that bordered on manic. On Wednesday evening, I walked through the heavy front door to find 24 long-stemmed white roses arranged in a massive crystal vase on the kitchen island. On Thursday, he preemptively ordered an extravagant dinner from the exclusive Japanese restaurant downtown, an establishment that typically required a reservation 3 months in advance. He hovered around me while I ate, pouring my sparkling water, repeatedly asking if the new integration role was draining my energy, his voice dripping with an artificial, practiced concern. He was desperately trying to spackle the cracks in a dam that was already silently disintegrating beneath him. I played my part flawlessly. I smiled softly, thanked him for his incredible thoughtfulness, and claimed the long hours of the executive onboarding process were simply catching up with me. The tension at the Meridian Harbor Systems office was entirely different. It was buoyant, electric, and agonizing to witness. On Thursday afternoon, Brooke pulled two heavy garment bags out from beneath her desk, her hands practically trembling with nervous excitement. She unzipped them carefully to reveal two stunning evening gowns. One was a deep, rich midnight blue velvet, the other a sweeping, luminous ivory silk. "I am completely torn," she whispered, holding the heavy fabrics up against her body. "Ian told me there will be hundreds of people there tomorrow night, the entire executive board, private equity investors, the media. I want to look absolutely perfect. I want to look like the woman standing next to the successful man of her life. Which one should I choose?" "Ava." I looked at the two dresses hanging in the sterile, fluorescent light of the office. The blue velvet was elegant, safe, and easily forgotten. The ivory silk was striking. It was pure, radiant, and undeniably bridal. It was the exact color of a woman stepping blindly into a promised future. "The ivory," I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of malice. "It is breathtaking. It will make you stand out in the middle of a crowded room." I did not offer that advice out of goodwill or friendship. I chose it because I knew exactly how that pristine, hopeful white would look when the absolute devastation of his betrayal finally washed over her. I wanted the visual contrast to be as sharp, unforgiving, and unforgettable as the truth itself. I wanted the truth to be impossible to miss when it finally came out. While Brooke was dreaming of her grand romantic entrance, I was quietly finalizing the architecture of a corporate execution. My encrypted inbox pinged with a brief, sterile confirmation message from Claire Donovan. The internal compliance operation was locked in. Claire, alongside a senior legal representative from Meridian, would attend the Harbor Light Grand Gala under the guise of an informal networking invitation. They would be dressed in standard evening attire, blending perfectly into the crowd of investors and executives, waiting strictly for my visual confirmation before initiating the company's defense protocols to kill the Mercer Ridge contract. Less than an hour later, Simone Hart called my secure line. Her voice possessed a pure, lethal efficiency that sent a reassuring calm through my veins. "The ex parte motions are signed and sealed," she confirmed, the rustle of heavy legal paper audible in the background. "My lead process server will be parked in a black sedan exactly 2 blocks away from the hotel entrance starting at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. He has the emergency asset freeze injunctions and the formal divorce petition in his briefcase. The second you send me a single text message, he walks into that ballroom and serves Julian in front of his entire board." I agreed, confirming the tactical timing down to the exact minute. Thursday night, Julian packed a heavy leather garment bag with his custom black tuxedo. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, carefully adjusting the vintage rose gold watch on his wrist. "I have to head over to the Harbor Light Grand early tomorrow afternoon to run through the technical rehearsal for the pitch," he explained, his eyes glowing with an intoxicating mix of adrenaline and blinding arrogance. "I probably will not see you until Sunday morning, since I have back-to-back strategy breakfasts with the private equity partners all weekend." He walked over, pressed a warm kiss to the crown of my head, and then uttered a sentence so profoundly ironic it took every ounce of my physical willpower not to burst into a fit of hysterical laughter. "Get some rest, sweetheart," he murmured. "Tomorrow night is going to change everything." He had absolutely no idea that his prophecy was flawlessly accurate, just entirely misdirected. Friday evening arrived with a chilling, quiet finality. I did not rush. I took a long, burning hot shower, letting the heavy steam clear the last remaining traces of static from my mind. I stood before my expansive closet and deliberately bypassed the colorful, vibrant evening gowns I usually wore to corporate charity events. I was not attending a celebration, and I was certainly not dressing to play the cliché part of the hysterical, jealous wife seeking a dramatic revenge. I was stepping onto a corporate battlefield as an executioner. I selected a minimalist, architectural black sheath dress. It featured sharp lines, long fitted sleeves, and an uncompromising, severe silhouette. I paired it with simple, delicate diamond studs and pulled my hair back into a tight, flawless chignon. My makeup was muted, cold, and precise. Looking in the tall mirror, I did not see a victim of infidelity. I saw an undeniable, terrifying reality that could never be dismissed or talked away by a charismatic liar. At exactly 8 o'clock, my hired black car pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of the Harbor Light Grand. The luxury hotel was a towering monument to old Boston wealth, glowing with warm amber light against the dark, freezing water of the harbor. I stepped out of the vehicle, the cool night air brushing against my face, sharpening my senses. In my left hand, I held a sleek black leather clutch containing my mobile phone, already loaded with the trigger message for Simone. In my right hand, I carried a thick, unmarked manila envelope. Inside that envelope rested the forged property deeds, the comprehensive wire transfer receipts, the LLC and corporation papers, and the internal vendor strategy document bearing my name. I walked through the towering revolving glass doors and stepped onto the vast expanse of the marble lobby. The muffled, elegant sound of a live string quartet and the faint clinking of champagne glasses drifted down from the grand ballroom on the mezzanine level. My heart rate was a steady, slow, rhythmic drumbeat. There was absolutely no fear left in my veins. There was only the icy, absolute certainty of the impending strike. I walked toward the staircase with the evidence in my hand, calm enough that no one looking at me would have guessed what was about to happen. The elevator ascended smoothly to the top floor of the Harbor Light Grand. The doors parted to reveal a private banquet hall bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. I walked over to the reception table. A young hostess offered me a blank gold-rimmed name badge and a black marker. I did not write my title. I simply wrote my full legal name, Ava Ravenswood, in sharp, deliberate letters, peeled the backing off, and pressed it onto my black dress. Inside the room, the networking session was in full swing. Waiters drifted through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. In the center of the room, standing beneath the largest chandelier, was my husband. He was holding a crystal glass, commanding the attention of the Meridian Harbor Systems Executive Board, several private equity investors, and key financial partners. Beside him stood Brooke, looking breathtaking and tragic in her ivory silk gown, radiating the energy of a woman who believed her entire life was about to begin. I moved through the crowd. I did not rush. People glanced over and stepped aside as I approached. I stopped just outside the edge of their inner circle. Julian was in the middle of a sentence about aggressive market expansion when he turned his head and saw me. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The charming, the confident smile vanished from his face as if it had been struck by lightning. His mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his cheeks. For the first time in his life, his brilliant, calculating brain completely short-circuited. Brooke noticed his sudden silence and followed his gaze. When she saw me, her face lit up with genuine, innocent surprise. "Ava," Brooke smiled, stepping forward slightly. "You came. I had no idea you were on the guest list for tonight." I did not look at Brooke. I kept my eyes entirely locked on the man who had stolen my life. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my drink. When I spoke, my voice was quiet, but everyone close enough to hear me went still. "Before you talk about financial transparency and partner trust," I said, ensuring my voice carried to the investors standing right beside him, "perhaps you should introduce your true identity to everyone." Julian panicked. He stepped forward, reaching out to grab my elbow, his voice dropping to a desperate, frantic whisper. "Ava, what are you doing? Let us step outside right now." I smoothly stepped back, evading his grasp. I walked directly to the high cocktail table in the center of their group and dropped the heavy manila envelope onto the glass surface. The loud smack echoed sharply, silencing the remaining conversations around us. "I will not be stepping anywhere with you," I announced, turning to face the shocked Meridian executives and the bewildered investors. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Ava Ravenswood. I am the Senior Director of Integration Strategy at Meridian Harbor Systems. I am also the legal current wife of the man standing before you. Julian Cross. A collective, stunned silence fell over the group. Brooke physically recoiled, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Her wide eyes darted wildly between me and Julian, the horrifying reality beginning to fracture her mind. Julian Cross is operating under the fabricated alias of Ian Mercer, I continued, my voice unwavering. Furthermore, in the internal strategy appendix of the pitch deck he submitted to this board, he illicitly listed my name and my executive position as a strategic asset to bypass your compliance protocols. Before Julian could string together a single syllable of defense, the crowd parted again. Claire Donovan, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, stepped into the circle alongside Meridian's chief legal counsel. Claire did not look at Julian. She looked directly at the investors. On behalf of Meridian Harbor Systems, I am officially confirming that we are permanently suspending all communications and negotiations with Mercer Ridge Advisory, Claire stated, her tone exhibiting absolute corporate authority. We have uncovered severe conflicts of interest, heavily falsified vendor documentation, and highly opaque funding origins. This is an absurd misunderstanding, Julian finally choked out, his voice cracking under the pressure. He looked at the private equity partners, his hands raised in a pathetic plea. This is a private domestic dispute that is bleeding into my professional space. I can explain everything. There is nothing to explain, I cut in. Untying the string of the envelope, I pulled out the top document and held it up. Because your startup capital is not a misunderstanding. It is a felony. I turned to Brooke. The ivory dress suddenly looked like a shroud. I handed her the banking flowcharts and the copy of the property line of credit. The earnest money deposit for your new penthouse overlooking the Charles River, I told her softly, and the rent for your current apartment, and the seed funding for this entire fraudulent company did not come from his success. It came from a home equity line of credit that he illegally opened against my premarital property 3 months ago by forging my signature. Brooke stared at the papers in her trembling hands. The color of her face matched the silk of her dress. She looked at the highlighted transfer total. Then she looked at the forged signature. Then, she slowly raised her eyes to Julian. The absolute adoration she had held for him was gone, replaced by a devastating, hollow realization. She was not the woman he had chosen. She was another person he had lied to and used. So, Brooke whispered, her voice breaking on the single syllable. She clutched the papers to her chest. All this time, you were planning to marry me using her money. Julian reached for her, but Brooke violently shoved his hand away, taking a large step backward into the crowd. The room rapidly disintegrated. The lead private equity investor scoffed in disgust, placed his champagne glass on a passing tray, and walked directly toward the exit, signaling his team to follow. The Meridian executives stepped away from Julian at once, making it clear they wanted no connection to him. I turned away from the wreckage and began walking toward the grand staircase. As I reached the bottom step of the marble lobby, a man in a gray suit stepped through the revolving doors. It was Simone's process server. He walked straight past me, ascending the stairs toward the ballroom. Julian was about to be served with emergency asset freeze injunctions and divorce papers in front of whatever remained of his shattered audience. I walked out into the freezing Boston night, entirely silent. There were no tears, no screaming matches, no emotional collapses. I slid into the back seat of my waiting car and instructed the driver to take me home. I had kept my executive position. I had successfully activated the legal mechanisms to freeze my stolen assets. In the weeks that followed, Brooke would provide a voluntary, fully sworn testimony to my legal team and the federal investigators regarding the financial gifts and the fraudulent penthouse deposit. Julian lost everything in a span of 10 minutes. He lost his company, his professional reputation, his marriage, and his mistress. But most importantly, he lost the arrogant, blinding illusion that he could control 3 entirely different lives with nothing but smooth lies and forged signatures. The board was cleared, the game was over, and I was the only one left sitting at the table. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. I would love to know where you are listening from. So please drop your location in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Amelia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us even more by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people around the world.